The desert sun of Tarmex 4 didn't shine it seared. Daniel Hawthorne squinted through polarized lenses, sweat already streaking down his back despite the cooling mesh of his field uniform. The air shimmered off the violet sands in waves of blistering heat. Behind him, the other exchange students were fanning themselves, muttering complaints in a dozen tongues, human and otherwise. And at the front of the gathering, floating 2 meters above the cracked rock, was Professor Lurog. Professor Lurog was shaped like a tapering cylinder, his skin a gleaming lapis blue, covered in what Daniel had learned were sensory nodules. The professor's 6 limbs hovered in an unsettling stillness, as if he didn't feel the heat at all. He wore no translator. His words emerged directly into the minds of the students through neural transmission. The sensation was always slightly itchy. "This," Lurog announced, "is your midterm." A murmur rippled through the group. Daniel crossed his arms. "You will construct a vehicle capable of traversing 50 standard miles across the Garan expanse. You may not use combustion or anti-grav propulsion. You may not request assistance from native lifeforms or automated systems. You will have 3 local days. The race will begin at dawn on the 4th. A tall student from Avon Prime raised a limb. "Professor, what are we rated on? Survival, completion, ingenuity?" The professor's body rotated slightly, his version of looking over the group. "Those who do not finish the course will receive failing scores. Those whose vehicles do not survive the environment will also fail." Another hand shot up, a human girl named Leela from a colony on Europa. "Is this legal?" Lurog's mind voice bristled with an edge of amusement. "The university has reviewed all legal parameters. You volunteered for the Interstellar Resilience Exchange. This is resilience." Daniel didn't speak. He was already calculating. He knew this kind of test, not just physical endurance but insight. Survival and completion were obvious. Ingenuity was the real test. And that was where he lived. By nightfall, the students had scattered to their assigned workstations, scattered domes and maker bays, scattered along the edge of the desert plateau. Daniel found his assigned bay, a simple dome with 1 fabrication array, a limited toolset, and a diagnostic terminal. The rest he'd have to bring with him or scavenge. He dropped his pack, pulled out a folded sheet of carbon paper and an old pencil stub, and began to sketch. He didn't even consider mining the rock for fuel or building a wind sail like some of the others. There was only one consistent thing on Tarmex 4 in the daytime unrelenting sun. He was going to build a solar car, not a rover, not a drone. A car with actual wheels. Because wheels, unlike hover plates, didn't require recalibration every time a grain of magnetic dust got stuck in the vents. And solar panels. He'd been working with those since he was 13, rigging a toaster oven in his dad's garage with reflective foil and salvaged optics. He spent that night inventorying materials. The fabrication array could print a lightweight titanium aluminum alloy, not enough for a full chassis, but enough for the frame. The rest he'd have to build from scratch or repurpose. He took apart the sleeping cot, cut up the dome's unused rain shield, and even carefully removed the reflective panels from the emergency beacon, knowing full well that doing so would disable his distress signal. He did it anyway. By the next morning, the other students were already at work. Some were arguing over propulsion algorithms. A few had already started welding hover components together. One pair, a duo from Paraxis, had built what looked like a centipede made of copper tubes and antigrav pucks. Daniel rolled his eyes and kept working. By the end of the first day, he had built the beginnings of a chassis. 4 wheels, each rimmed with rubber made from regolith polymers, a steering column jury rigged from hydraulic tubing, and a frame that looked like a rib cage made of bones from a robot graveyard. On the second day, the solar array came together. He arranged 32 high-efficiency panels scavenged from the dome's outer shell, lining them into a foldable canopy that would stretch over the top of the car like a shell. He wired them into capacitors salvaged from the diagnostic terminal. Using heat-resistant cable he had to braid by hand, he burned his fingers, twice. Once badly enough that he had to wrap the palm of his left hand in cooling gel and couldn't hold tools properly for almost 6 hours. He didn't stop. He just learned to use his elbow and a clamp. On the morning of the third day, while others were still calibrating their drones and arguing over power distribution, Daniel rolled his vehicle barely more than a skeleton with wheels out into the sun. The panels unfolded with a soft hum. Lurog floated silently nearby, observing. Daniel didn't look at him. By sundown, he had test-driven it 3 times, each time adjusting the torque, the cooling intake, and the rudimentary suspension. It had no onboard AI, no terrain mapping, no shielding, but it ran, and it ran on sunlight. At dawn, the students lined up at the edge of the Garin expanse. The start was marked by a vertical spike of white light driven into the sand. 50 miles ahead, near the foot of a crumbling basalt ridge, another spike marked the finish. Lurog floated above the group. "You will begin on my signal. Once you cross the line, no external assistance will be permitted. Those who abandon their vehicles must proceed on foot. Dropping out will be recorded." The professor rotated once in the air. "Begin." There was no countdown, no horn, just a silent pulse in the mind. Engines whined, hovercraft lifted, wheels spun, and the racers launched forward into the desert. Daniel's solar car lurched once, then picked up speed. The tires bounced lightly over the cracked surface. The panels above him glinted like a beetle's shell. The wind offered little resistance. His frame was low, narrow, and the canopy curved just enough to cut through the air. Within the first 10 miles, 3 hovercrafts had already shorted out. The magnetic dust of Tarmex 4 clung to exposed circuits like static to wool. One of the drones collided with a dune and snapped in two. Its pilot staggered out, cursing in a language Daniel didn't recognize. He kept driving. By mile 20, the heat had climbed to a level that made the air feel like breathing through a furnace. Daniel's cooling vest was working overtime, but he still felt his body dragging. He sipped from his reserve water pouch and checked the power gauge. The panels were overperforming. The sun here was brutal, but it was energy. He was harvesting it with every second. Then came the rock field. A jagged stretch of basalt and ironstone, fractured into sharp ridges. Most of the hovercrafts tried to go around, wasting time and energy. Daniel slowed and shifted gears. The wheels ground forward, scraping but holding. He bounced once the front axle cracked but held. He gritted his teeth and kept going. At mile 30, one of the Paraxis twins tried to overtake him. Their centipede-like craft moved in a sinuous wave, supported by a line of shimmering grav pucks. It was fast, too fast. When it hit a dune at an angle, the front collapsed inward like a folding chair. The pilot tumbled out, dazed, and Daniel swerved to avoid him, the tire kicking up a spray of purple dust. "Hey," Daniel shouted, slowing slightly. "You all right?" The alien blinked, nodded once, then laid back into the sand. Daniel kept going. At mile 40, a sudden gust of wind threatened to rip the solar canopy clean off. Daniel slammed the emergency clamps shut, holding the panels in place, but not before one was damaged. The corner shattered like ice. The power gauge dipped. He had to conserve. He shut off the secondary systems. The cooling vest went first. Then the capacitor's stabilizers. The ride got rougher. He started to feel lightheaded. His vision swam at the edges. With only 5 miles left, the sand turned to glass. A recent solar flare had flash-heated the surface, melting the top layer into a shimmering, uneven field of danger. One wheel cracked on impact. The whole vehicle tilted. Daniel held the steering bar with both hands, arms trembling. The car groaned but moved 1 mile. The finish line visible now, a thin pillar of white light. Then the front axle snapped. The car pitched forward, flipping once. Daniel was thrown clear, landing hard on his right side. Pain exploded through his ribs. He gasped, tried to stand, and crumpled. His right leg wouldn't bear weight. He dragged himself to the wreckage, tore off the canopy, and ripped 2 panels free. He looped one around his chest, strapping it with the seatbelt. The other he turned into a makeshift sled. He crawled onto it, using his good leg and arms to push forward, inch by inch. The sun burned his skin. His lips cracked. The pain in his ribs sharpened with every breath, but he kept going. He passed the finish line with 20 minutes to spare. Lurog was waiting. "You are injured." Daniel collapsed into the sand, blinking up at the sky. "Yeah, not ideal." The professor hovered silently above him for a long moment. You received no assistance. Nope. You completed the course. Your vehicle reached 49.7 miles before failure. You then proceeded using derivative materials from the craft. Sounds about right. Lurog rotated once. Your grade is complete. Medical aid is authorized. Daniel laughed once, then winced. Great timing. 2 med techs floated in, lifting him gently onto a stretcher. As they carried him away, he looked back at the remains of his solar car. It had broken. But it had worked, and he had crossed the finish line. Daniel woke up in a medical pod that smelled faintly of sterilized salt and something floral he couldn't place. His right leg was immobilized in a carbon brace, and a transparent patch covered the bruised mess of his ribs. The pod's ambient lighting adjusted as he blinked, shifting from gentle mauve to a clear, cool white. A pair of elongated figures stood at the foot of the pod, murmuring in a language composed of glottal pulses and throat clicks. One of them noticed he was awake and tapped a screen. The other continued adjusting a drip line with a set of thin, jointless fingers. "You're stable," said the one at the console, speaking through an artificial larynx that gave the voice a fluttery, almost amused cadence. "No internal bleeding, though your fibula is cracked and your thoracic muscles are moderately torn. You're lucky," Daniel swallowed. "It doesn't feel lucky. You retained consciousness through the finish line. That's unusual for a biped after blunt trauma and heat exhaustion." He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His vision edged with sparks and a wave of nausea forced him flat again. "Yeah, no," he muttered. "Bad idea." The medtech's face twitched in what might have been sympathy or mild confusion. "You are advised to remain horizontal for at least one more full cycle. Nutrient infusion is underway. You'll be capable of unsupported movement in 2 days, though full recovery will require 8 days, unless you prefer regeneration acceleration. That would involve cell rewriting. There's a waiver." "No thanks." He looked past them, trying to gauge how long he'd been out. "How long since the race ended?" 17 hours. The medtech tilted their head. "Professor Lurog has requested a debrief." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Now, after you're cleared for movement," he specified when the human is upright and mostly coherent. "Great. I'll try to hit both targets." After another hour, the drip was removed and replaced with a rehydration patch. The brace stayed on, but the pod split open with a soft hiss, allowing him to swing his legs down carefully. His foot throbbed the moment it touched the floor, but he gritted his teeth and stood. The medtech handed him a mobility cane shaped like a spiral, and he took it without argument. The hall outside was a corridor of shifting color, the walls responding to temperature and mood. They pulsed a soft amber as he limped through, passing a few curious glances from other students, most of them non-human. One with a translucent skull nodded at him slowly, their eyes unreadable. Another, a plant-based being with fibrous limbs, leaned toward him slightly, as if sniffing for confirmation. When he reached the briefing chamber, Lurog was floating in his usual posture, limbs folded in toward his central axis. The chamber was circular, with tiered seating and a central platform Daniel guessed was meant for presentations or public humiliation. Lurog gestured toward it. "You may sit or remain standing. Your condition is noted." Daniel eased himself onto the step closest to the floor. "Appreciate it." "What's this about?" Lurog didn't answer immediately. Instead, he projected a 3-dimensional model of the solar car, rotating slowly above the platform. The damage was shown in stages: initial stress fractures, the axle collapse, Daniel's modifications to the canopy. He watched his own descent into the final mile, the panels dragging through glassed sand. "Your design was unconventional," Lurog said at last. "I didn't see any rules against wheels." "There were none. Most assumed the terrain made them obsolete," Daniel shrugged. "I grew up on bad roads." "You learn fast when suspension's a luxury." Lurog rotated one limb outward. "You also deconstructed emergency equipment and repurposed it. That is not typically encouraged. Would have been more dangerous not to finish. The medtech said heatstroke would have set in within 20 minutes. Correct. And yet, most species would have signaled for extraction before that point." He said nothing. After a pause, Lurog's limbs shifted slightly, a posture Daniel had learned meant contemplation. You were observed continuing past the failure point of your vehicle. You repurposed material mid-course. You improvised with no external input. That was the assignment, wasn't it? Completion was expected through sustained functionality. You altered the objective. Daniel frowned. I thought the objective was survival, completion, ingenuity. Lurog floated lower until they were almost eye level. You interpreted all three as flexible. You adapted the assignment to match your limitations. Few species do this without formal reauthorization. Humans do it instinctively. Lurog's nodules pulsed briefly. We are beginning to understand that. There was silence between them for several seconds. Then a soft chime sounded and a feed opened along the chamber wall. It displayed rankings, color-coded by category. Daniel's name pulsed near the top, but not first. Wait, I didn't win. You did not finish first. A quad-ocular student from the Rinkva Collective completed the course in less time with a hovercraft that remained functional. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but your design has been submitted for archival. It will become part of the university's resilience curriculum. He blinked. You're putting my junkyard car in the syllabus, with full citation. You have the option to decline. No way, that's hilarious. Another pause. You are also being considered for a field study assignment. Outside this system, Daniel leaned back slightly. That's a big leap from a desert race. You demonstrated decision-making under failure conditions. Some departments value that more than technical perfection. He rubbed his temple. Where? Zarvex 9, a planet undergoing terraforming trials. The local fauna are reactive, the atmosphere semi-stable. It's not a safe environment. Let me guess, no combustion or antigrav. There are no stable energy sources. You would be required to innovate locally. Daniel grinned. You're inviting me to another disaster. Your reaction suggests approval. He shifted the cane slightly and stood. I'll think about it. You have 48 hours. Medical clearance is required. Outside the chamber, he found Leela waiting, her expression somewhere between incredulous and impressed. She had a small scar on her cheek now, probably from the race, but she stood tall. Did they really archive your car? Apparently, it's part of the curriculum now. You were half dead. Yeah, but I made it stylish. She glanced sideways at him. The Rinkva kids still bragging about their finished time. Let them. They didn't drag a solar sled through molten sand. She laughed, then caught herself. You know, the others are saying humans have some kind of defect. Oh, something about risk perception being underdeveloped. Daniel adjusted the cane and started walking. That's not a defect. That's an advantage with poor PR. They passed a cluster of students watching a replay of the final stretch. A few turned as he walked by. One, a reptilian with a frilled crest, narrowed their eyes and gestured solemnly. That means something? Daniel asked. Leela nodded. Respect gesture. It's rare. He looked back at the chamber door. So surviving your own stupidity. When he reached the dorm wing, he found a small box outside his door. Inside was a note written in blocky script from a language he didn't read, but he recognized the initials, Lurog. He unfolded the contents, a folded cloth, stitched with a diagram of his car's final configuration, and a single word printed beneath in galactic standard. Repurposed. Daniel set it on his desk and lay back on the cot. The brace dug into his leg, and the ache in his chest hadn't faded, but he smiled anyway. He'd broken everything but the rules, and that, apparently, was enough. 2 days after the race, Daniel's leg still ached like it had opinions, but the brace had been replaced with a flexible support sleeve that adjusted tension based on how much he moved. He hadn't asked for the upgrade. The medtechs insisted, citing human overexertion patterns. His ribs were healing slower, every breath still pulled, but at least he could walk without the cane now, even if it meant moving like someone twice his age and half as coordinated. The campus outside the dorm dome had transformed. Where before it hummed with the quiet focus of academic routine, now it buzzed. Students who'd barely acknowledged him before now watched as he passed, some with curiosity, others with the sort of wary respect normally reserved for dangerous creatures and malfunctioning machinery. In the atrium, Two tall, shimmering beings, a pair from some aquatic world, paused mid-conversation as he approached. One of them emitted a low trill, the other blinked all three eyelids at once. He pretended not to notice. Leela caught up to him near the nutrient dispensers. "You're trending on 6 different local networks," she said. "Even the ones that usually only post about virology memes and gravitational anomalies." He lifted a cup from the dispenser and tested the grayish fluid, something vaguely fruity but mostly just cold. "That's unsettling." "Yeah, well, so is dragging yourself through glass with a solar panel strapped to your back." He sipped again. "Any word on the Zarvex assignment? They finalized the list this morning. You're on it." Daniel set the cup down. "Didn't expect them to move that fast." "They didn't. Lurog overrode the delay, said something about momentum-based learning." He tilted his head. "That mean I'm not allowed to sit still for a week? It means you leave in 6 hours." He stared at her. "Seriously?" She handed him a folded data slip. "Packing list, location, manifest, and a contract. You're on the night shuttle." Daniel blinked. "That's barely enough time for me to change socks." "You'll be issued new ones. Also, a full mobility suit, terrain patches, and an environmental adapter." "They're not sending you in blind. Appreciate the thought. You sure you want to go?" Her expression softened. "No one would blame you if you backed out." He looked past her at the reflection of himself in the atrium glass. The shadows under his eyes hadn't faded, and the brace left a faint, uneven wrinkle down the side of his pant leg. But he was upright and breathing, and he'd beaten a desert with junk and sunlight. "I'm going," he said. 6 hours later, he stood on the launch pad with a duffel slung over one shoulder and a datapad under his arm. The shuttle was smaller than he expected, a narrow-winged craft with a dull green hull and a hatch that opened downward like a yawning mouth. A tall figure emerged from the shadows near the hatch, not Lurog. This one was shorter, wider, and covered in scales that shifted color as it moved. Its eyes were set deep in its face without visible pupils. "You are Hawthorne." "That's me." "I am Relin, logistics officer." "You will enter now." Daniel stepped inside, ducking as the ceiling sloped low. The shuttle's interior was all matte surfaces and narrow corridors, no seating, just harnesses along the walls. Relin gestured toward one. "You will remain secured for the duration. Descent will be friction-intensive." "Sounds charming." Relin didn't respond. The hatch closed with a hiss and a low vibration filled the cabin. Daniel clipped himself into the harness and leaned his head back. The lights dimmed. The descent to Zarvex 9 took less than an hour. The shuttle shuddered twice during atmospheric entry, then leveled with a jolt. Outside the small viewport, the sky was a churn of muted orange and green, with clouds that twisted like knotted rope. Below, the ground was a patchwork of gray soil and iridescent moss, interrupted by ridges of black stone and steam vents that pulsed like slow heartbeats. When the hatch opened, the heat hit him immediately, not dry, like the desert, but damp and heavy, clinging to his skin like a wet blanket someone had microwaved. The air smelled faintly of sulfur and something metallic. A squat building rose 50 meters ahead, all angles and reinforced plating. He limped toward it, adjusting the strap of his duffel as he walked. Inside, the command center was dim and cool. Screens displayed localized weather patterns and structural readouts. A central table projected a topographic model of the surrounding area. At one end of the room, a tall, insectoid figure leaned over a console, mandibles twitching. "You're the human," it said without turning. "The one who finished the Garin run with a sled. Guilty." I reviewed the footage. "You ignored standard protocol. Is that going to be a problem?" The figure turned. Its face was split vertically, its eyes compound and glinting. "No, that's why you're here." It introduced itself as Chirak, the site's operations lead. Over the next hour, Daniel was briefed on his assignment: assist in stabilizing a transport array that had been failing intermittently due to atmospheric interference and mineral disruptions in the crust. The previous team had abandoned the project after a series of near-fatal malfunctions. "You're expected to diagnose and adapt," Chirak said. "Not repair in the traditional sense. The equipment is semi-organic. It resists standard tools." Daniel scratched his temple. "So?" I can't fix it with a wrench. You can fix it with whatever doesn't get you electrocuted. He spent the next 3 days crawling through tunnels lined with bioconductive cable that twitched when touched. He wore a suit with modular gloves, each finger tipped with a different interface tool. The air inside the array chamber was thick with ionized particles that made his hair stand up and his fingertips tingle. On the second day, a surge knocked out the diagnostics panel and fried the translator node in his helmet. He spent 4 hours communicating through hand gestures and marker boards with a gelatinous technician named Vru, who seemed to find the entire situation hilarious. By the 5th day, he'd built a bypass system using scrap from a decommissioned drone, 2 pieces of thermal insulation, and the stripped outer casing of his ration warmer. It worked for 14 straight hours before the array pulsed once, then stabilized permanently. When Chirac reviewed the logs, it clicked its mandibles twice. You used meal equipment to conduct energy around a neural relay. Daniel shrugged. It fit. You do not approach problems. You sneak up behind them and hit them with lunch. That's the human method. The next morning, Daniel was cleared for return. As he boarded the shuttle, Relin handed him a sealed container. From Chirac, you are requested to open it only after departure. He waited until they breached orbit. Inside was a single object, a replacement panel from the array etched with a diagram of his bypass system and a line of text beneath it in blocky standard script. Functional, unorthodox, acceptable. He smiled, leaned back in the harness, and closed his eyes. The universe didn't need perfect plans. It needed people willing to improvise with what they had, including their lunchbox.